someone who believes in the promise of America fits the definition of a patriot. What happens, though, in the reverse a lot of times is some people will assume that because they're performative or because they've got the ability to stand on a podium, that makes them this extra patriot, this super patriot. There's a word for that. It's called a nationalist. And we are not a nationalist country, or at least we were not a nationalist country. We hope to never become a truly nationalist country.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I'm joined today by Ché Bolden, former F-18 Marine Corps fighter pilot, retired colonel, and I just pulled this from the bio, Ché. We're going to talk about USAID in addition to the top line topic. You were the International Affairs Program Coordinator for the United States Marine Corps. But let's talk about Trump's assaults on DEI. We just had Bobby Jones on the show, fan favorite here. I didn't realize he is the grandson, or his wife is the granddaughter of a Tuskegee airman who Bobby got to know extremely well. And we both shared this observation that in the military, as I would imagine in the rest of life, to make it through and reach that level of achievement and excellence as a Black man in America, and, run down the list as a woman in America, as a minority in America, you actually have to be better than everybody else because the spotlight is always on you and people are waiting for you to mess up. So every time I hear Donald Trump or Charlie Kirk or whoever look at a picture of an airline crew with a Black person in it and say, oh boy, I think just the opposite, and it makes my blood boil. I can only imagine how, as a former F-18 pilot, it makes you feel.
Well, first, in deference to my pilot brethren, I got to admit I'm a backseater. I'm a navigator, but still I was an F-18 guy. Ken, the truth of the matter is people are too sensitive, really. And I think that what that does when people react in a negative way to statements like that, it strikes a nerve because what they're saying is someone who is sitting right next to them, who they think they're equals to, had to work harder than they did to get there. And they feel it's an assault on their personal achievements and personal accomplishments when it's the exact opposite. They're not the ones that had to, stay up late or put in extra hours or, unfortunately suck up to the boss in ways that is unnatural or uncomfortable for other people. I sit back and I look at people like my father, who went to the United States Naval Academy in 1964. So as he was there, the things that he had to do, he had to be twice as good. And that's just the reality, because any excuse that people could find to tell him or anyone else that would listen that he didn't belong there, he had to be prepared to debunk or prove that wasn't true. As I listen to the rhetoric today, I can't help but think that people are just a little bit too sensitive about their own personal performance. If we're going to go to this MEI, don't actually ask me what that means, but merit, the term merit is just another way of saying performance based. And if that's the case, I think we're a long way from it, because there are a lot of people right now who are sitting in positions of authority that aren't there because of their performance. Look, I'm both a DEI hire and a Nepo baby. Okay. So I can sit there and tell people, what my experiences were. And they're probably not going to be that much different than a lot of other people's experiences that don't have the same benefits or privileges that I have, but I still had to work for it.
Yeah. Can you explain the Nepo baby reference for those who aren't familiar with your extraordinary father?
Well, in a lot of cases, most people aren't necessarily going to look at someone who looks like me and automatically assume I'm a Nepo baby, because the Nepo is short for nepotism. And when you have someone in your family or in your immediate vicinity that's got a lot of influence and power, they use that influence and power in order to give you an unfair opportunity. And so a lot of people perceive me to be that way. My father, 1968 graduate of the United States Naval Academy, rose to the rank of Major General in the United States Marine Corps, became a United States astronaut, and then he eventually became the 12th Administrator of NASA. That is not insignificant. That is not without its perks and its influences. And people automatically assume that everything that I was able to do or accomplish was because my father had opened the door for me. And if it wasn't because my father had opened the door for me, it was because I was an athlete. And that, in some cases or some circumstances, was code for Black and not actually qualified, except I could run fast.
Yeah. One of the things that has changed my whole attitude towards patriotism is talking to folks like Bobby Jones and Mike Washington, who, if you haven't met, I'm going to make sure I introduce you to him. One of my role models and a father figure, Black Americans, veterans, who have convinced me that the way to love your country is to ask more of it, is to want your country to live up to the promises it has made. And there's no community that understands that better than, I think, Black veterans who serve in disproportionate numbers, not because everything their country has done for them, but because of the promise of America and those values enshrined in the Constitution and the Declaration that haven't been met, that haven't been lived up to. I would love for you to share your family perspective on that as a legacy veteran, someone whose family has devoted their lives to serving a very imperfect country.
Right. Again, I think it goes back to this idea of self and what each individual, how they see themselves. Yes, there is a case to be made to say that if you are a Black American or a Hispanic American or anything other than a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American, that by you going and doing certain things that you are demonstrating a higher level of patriotism. I want to disavow that first and foremost. A patriot is a patriot. Someone who believes in the promise of America fits the definition of a patriot. What happens though in the reverse a lot of times is some people will assume that because they're performative or because they've got the ability to stand on a podium, that makes them this extra patriot, this super patriot. There's a word for that. It's called a nationalist. And we are not a nationalist country, or at least we were not a nationalist country. We hope to never become a truly nationalist country. That is not to make the mistake of saying that national pride is not important or understanding what it means to be an American and the benefits and, quite frankly, the good fortune. I live in a very interesting household. We have a mixed marriage in a lot of ways. My wife is a Caucasian woman from Australia. So we've got an international household plus a multiracial household. Looking at trying to look at the world through my wife's eyes, it is a different perspective to mine. No better, no worse. It's just different. And so when we talk about what it means to our family about patriotism, my wife just became an American citizen, recently after we've been married for almost 3 decades. But she did see the promise of America and she wanted to have a voice in that. And so we take that back and put it and fold it into the Bolden narrative, the Bolden family. Going back to my grandfathers, on both sides, they fought in World War II, even when they were not welcome to do so. That is the sense of patriotism. When you see that there is something greater than yourself worth fighting for, and you're willing to do anything that you can in order to protect that thing, whether it be your family, your friends, or your country. It is very important that you believe it is something that should endure and that you are willing to give everything all the way up to your life in order to protect it. Please forgive my little yap dog.
I got my German Shepherd behind the screen here, so we're both dog people. It's all good.
Yeah, So when I watched my father throughout his career do what he did, in spite or despite some of the obstacles put in his way, and he was still able to achieve what he was able to achieve, I sit in awe. That's exceptional. I have been forced lately to look at my own personal accomplishments and say, you know what? That was not normal. The percentages of Marines who are fortunate enough to be entrusted by their peers and their superiors to be elevated to the rank of colonel is not abnormal. I'm sorry, it's not normal. It's not the normal way people go, or to be entrusted with command. These are all things that have to be earned. The Marine Corps, for all its flaws, the one thing it makes sure to do is it makes sure that anybody that gets above a certain line meets the standard. I was listening to somebody the other day, I find it really interesting that any discussion around DEI, which we could have the discussion in this vernacular today as code for other things, but the immediate thing that follows after DEI is qualifications. I sure hope they're qualified. Kind of like what you said earlier is when someone looks at a picture and they see a Black pilot, their first thought is, I hope they're qualified. That's really offensive. If I was to look at somebody from Idaho and say, you know what, I really hope they're qualified, Idahoans, I hope I said that right, would be very offended by that, because that is a generic blanket statement based on no fact whatsoever. I lost track of your question because I got on a roll there. Sorry.
Well, it's funny that the only picture of an aircrew or a boardroom that doesn't raise that suspicion amongst MAGA and Trump and the Charlie Kirks of the world is one that's all white. And I think that's the giveaway, right? They never say anything about that.
Very true.
And that's the tell. Can you share with with this audience, most of whom haven't spent time in an F-18 cockpit, what you mean when you talk about that standard of excellence. I mean, just paint for us a picture of a mission over Iraq or Afghanistan or the places you flew and the demands it places on the human body, on the psyche, on the mind. I mean, if there wasn't a baseline standard that was held for everybody, it would be the Marine Corps would have an impossible mission. It wouldn't be able to carry it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I go all the way back to the very beginning of my Marine Corps career, that's when it started. When I got commissioned, I actually was not commissioned as an aviator. I was commissioned as a ground contract. I finished in the top 97% of my class at the Naval Academy, so the choices and the options were somewhat limited. But when I got to the basic school, I had to earn my spot into flight school. And in order to earn my spot into flight school, I had to have a certain class rank. That was not a given. I could not just go into my staff platoon commander and say, hey, I deserve to be ranked at this point, so I go down to flight school. And him say, you know what, you're black, you deserve that chance, you should go. That was exactly the opposite. I actually had to maintain the standard, 300 PFT. We didn't have the CFT at the time, land navigation, which was my worst subject. And then everything else, I had to get the scores. I had to get the right grades in order to be ranked at a certain point within the basic school class in order to get that opportunity. And then when I got down to flight school, I actually went down as a naval pilot and trainer, a student naval aviator, and my eyes weren't good enough. There was a standard. At the time, it was 2030, correctable to 2020. I was above that. And so I had to transition my MOS into a different MOS. That's how I became a navigator. But even after that, there was still a standard that had to be held. I am not ashamed to admit that I fell short of the mark many a time. I ended up getting downs on certain flights. And after that, I had to remediate. That's the way the system regulates itself. If someone doesn't meet the norm, we offer an opportunity to correct it. And if you can't correct it, then you're gone. Once I got to the F-18 community, again, grades were the norm. No one was handing me grades. In fact, let me think about this for a second. I was fortunate enough to not have anybody that was at least not overtly against my presence there. But if I had, what that would have meant is I would have had to been exactly on point every single time, or they would have found that as an excuse to ding me. But to get to the point of your question, the F-18 is a very physically demanding platform. On any given mission, we can go from flying at a very high altitude on regulated oxygen to pulling up to 7.5 Gs at the limit of the airframe, and the airframe itself will fly at more than the speed of sound. When you are moving that fast, the decision-making process has to keep up with it. So if you are cognitively impaired or cognitively stunted, i.e. someone who is, as a lot of people imply a lot of times that they're less intelligent, then I wouldn't be able to keep up. I would not have been able to achieve every single instructor qualification available to an F-18 aircrew. I would not have been able to go to the Marine Corps' Weapons and Tactics Instructor course, which is the pinnacle of Marine Corps aviation. I would not have been able to attend and graduate from the United States Navy's Top Gun, their fighter weapons school. Those are things that the average person would not be able to do. And so the standard is well established. Many have gone before me, many have failed. I did not. That means I met the standard. And the system was never going to sacrifice that standard because they knew that lives of young Marines, young women and men who have raised their right hand to defend this country were going to rely upon my proficiency and my ability to do the job. When my father went to go do what he did, he was given a multi-billion-dollar platform, command of it twice, and entrusted to execute that mission flawlessly, not because he was black, but because he was qualified, because he knew the mission in and out. He knew the mission of his crewmates. He knew the mission of the mission support. All of those people looked to him in order to perform those duties. When he became the administrator of NASA, the entire organization and the entire space world looked to him for his leadership because he had proven time and time again that he belonged to be there. Contrary to what one person said a long time ago, your father was only an astronaut because he was black, right?
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I need a quick favor. We are launching Valor Media Network, a new YouTube channel to highlight positive role models who will take on the toxic influencers of the so-called manosphere. Think Joe Rogan. We've got some great hosts already lined up. You'll recognize some of them like Jason Kander, Dan Barkoff, and Bobby Jones. And we've got more coming on board soon. Please click on the link below to Valor Media Network's YouTube page and hit that subscribe button. These early signups make all the difference. Thank you so much. And needless to say, G-forces don't care what you look like, right? Surface air missiles don't care
Right.
what you look like. Space, in your father's case, doesn't care who's flying the space shuttle. The vacuum of space is pretty impartial when it comes to who's inside that billion-dollar machine. I want to pivot to the assaults on USAID and the shocking speed at which this administration is dismantling institutions that have taken us decades, generations to build. American soft power writ large is coming apart at the seams now. And you, as a Marine working for the International Affairs Program or the International Affairs Program coordinator at the Corps, had both perspectives. And I think my entree into this topic, excuse me, is General Mattis's observation that if you don't fund the State Department and USAID, you better buy me some more bullets, because that's the choice.
Right. Yeah. So, my experiences in the international diplomacy realm stem from the fact that I was given the opportunity to go to Spain as an military exchange student, and then I stayed and worked what's called security cooperation and security assistance for an additional period of time while I was there. And during that time, it gave me the experiences and the expertise to move into that position as the International Affairs Program Coordinator for the Marine Corps. And what I learned is basically doubling down on what General Mattis said. The impact that our aid work has done around the world has made up for the fact that we are limited in our capability of exercising hard power. Today, a lot of the discussions in the national security space revolve around great power competition and how do we counterbalance the influence of China. Well, we will never counterbalance the influence of China, bullet for bullet, or man or woman for man or woman. They just dwarf us in those capabilities. Where we benefit from the American experience and the American influence is our values and our ability to impact and make a difference in ways that are not kinetic. So the international affairs community, generally speaking, uses negotiation and persuasion as the tools by which we get our way. And one of the things, this used to cause a challenge in my house because my dad has never been afraid to admit since he retired of his political leanings, I still maintain a relatively independent position. But I used to defend President Bush quite a bit. And the main reason I defend President Bush as a fundamentally good human being is PEPFAR. If you go out to any country in Africa, George W. Bush is seen as a hero because the PEPFAR program, which was predominantly aid, changed the landscape of the continent of Africa. The 55 countries, I think, give or take, that are in Africa benefited from the soft power of PEPFAR. And the spread of HIV was significantly influenced and I wouldn't say contained, but it was addressed in a way that we will never, ever be able to address with hard power. We are able to educate or help to educate parts of the world through the application of the soft power through USAID, the State Department, Teachers for America, Peace Corps, you name all of these things that actually are what you would consider knowledge work. Let's be honest, the military is trade skills.
Yeah.
We work with our hands and we blow shit up and we kill people. But knowledge work, taking what you know and imparting it somewhere else, cannot be. That is a very quantifiable skill and a perishable skill, and you can't mass produce it really, really quickly. And so as we start to dismantle the entire infrastructure that goes into that line of our national power, it is going to take us a very, very, very long time to rebuild it. And I think when General Mattis made that comment, it was at the tail end of another kind of purge of State Department capabilities in the interest of budget. As we've gone through all these years, we have managed to maintain a positive presence around the world with ever shrinking budgets because people are they're committed to the mission. They understand the value of the soft power, and we've put at least enough resources behind it that it doesn't atrophy. I, like you, share the concern that may not be the case this time around, and it is going to irreparably harm the United States standing in the world.
Are you still hopeful? Do you have? Okay, talk to me
Always.
about that, because we need more of that here. Having seen the country go down a path that, frankly, I did not imagine it would. I was at the DNC. I was VP Harris's loudest cheerleader. I thought she was going to win. Seeing the popular vote go for Donald Trump shook my faith in America and a lot of this audience's faith. talk to us about how you maintain hopefulness.
Um, I pull that from my parents because they showed me that hope and optimism is really the only way you can keep your soul healthy. If you let the rest of it get you down, that's what leads to depression. That's what leads to other things. But I look at this opportunity right now, and I have this discussion with my daughters. I have an 18, 21, and 24-year-old daughter, all three of them. And they're of a generation right now that is really questioning, what's the purpose of America? They believe in it because they knew what I did. They knew what their grandfather did, but they really questioned. So I had this conversation with them all the time. And right after the election, I think I was very much like you. 71 million people elected a convicted felon to go sit in the White House. They support the placement of non-qualified individuals across the top tiers of our government. It doesn't mean that they're not
That's
going to do it.
DEI, by the way. That's actual.
Call it a rose by another name, right? Yeah. And we haven't actually talked about the value of the fundamental concepts behind that. But to get to your question, I remain hopeful. I consider myself the loyal opposition right now. And that's what a true democracy has. They have people who recognize that there are not areas that they agree with those who are in power, but they work diligently to find a way to move forward collectively. And regardless of what policies are being put out right now, I still maintain hope that enough Americans believe in the promise of America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, all of the rest of that they continue to put in the time and they put in the effort. The one thing that concerns me the most right now, Ken, is that we are being worn down. I mean, the pace and the velocity of the things that are coming out is overwhelming. And if you are not paying attention, you're just going to shut down. And that's exactly where we don't want to be. I've been called an alarmist in the past by saying this, but I would encourage all of your readers to go and read In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson and just process it. It is a different time. It is a different place. And so you can detach yourself from it from a bit. But I would challenge you to maintain that detachment, because as I read that book, no matter how hard I tried to stay objective and say, hey, I'm reading history. I could not help but think, oh, wow, that sounds, that looks, wait a minute. I just saw on the news the other day. No. You're imagining it, but I'm not. You will find that you are not imagining those things. So I am hopeful, though, only because the nation has been through a lot. Our parents lived through the civil rights era, where at that point, that was the second darkest time, most dark time in America behind the Civil War. And we've come out the other end. I will say that often overlooked communities, typically black and brown, but plenty of others. The Rust Belt is lily white and it is overlooked, and they're angry for a reason because of that reason they've been overlooked. But when you think about what it takes to persist, moms and dads all over the country continue to put food on the table for their children, regardless of the circumstances. They do that because they want their children to not have the same, disadvantages or hardships that they have. That's what hope normal people have day to day, because they keep it small. They keep it very limited. They talk about family. One of the reasons I believe family is so important in America is because that's the one thing we continue to hold on to from the natural tendencies of human beings, the tribe mentality. If more people started to remember that the United States is a collection of tribes, and I'm using that word intentionally because that again, that's not a appropriation. It is a descriptive term of people who find common interest, common purpose, and move forward together. Our tribe of America is made up of a bunch of different people. First and foremost, we are diversified just by virtue of the fact we have 50 states. We're not one solid state. We have different ones. We are diversified by the fact that you and I come from slightly different backgrounds. We have an education that is somewhat similar, but our upbringings were probably not the same. Yet here we are talking man to man as equals. These are the things that people need to remember. My benefit or my growth is not your loss. I am not going to say, I'm going to do this so that Ken Harbaugh is weaker or less capable of doing something. If I was thinking that way, that would make me a mean and malicious person. And I'd like to think I'm not a mean and malicious person. So that's how I continue to keep hope, is because, human beings fundamentally want to take care of themselves and the people they love. And each person is going to add or subtract one person from their circle. And if you think about that, that just starts to grow. And if we continue to remember that we are Americans by the grace of God or by grace of the divine, and it's not because we're inherently special, that we got to remember we've got to prove that to the world every single day. It is not a foregone conclusion.
Let's end on that note. I Really, really appreciate that perspective. And I'm going to put links to 2 books in the show notes. In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson, huge fan of his. I haven't read that one yet. And Tribe by Sebastian Junger, because I think he speaks to a lot of what you're talking about as well. Thanks so much, Ché, Colonel Bolden, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Ken. I love it. Appreciate it.